Hi there, my name is Toby and this is JEDI training. In this series I'm talking about how to feel the force. We've got to feel the energy, feel the chi, the ether, the prana, or the force, quite literally. And we've got to do that by using our body in a better way. We've got to get better body alignment, spinal alignment, and utilizing the joints correctly. So here now we're just starting by standing up nice and tall, pull the belly in, legs straight and just bouncing side to side. This is about the hips. Today we're working on the hip joint. We did the shoulders last time, the rib cage last time rather, and today we're going to do the hips. You've got to mobilize the joint itself. So you can see now here I'm just rocking side to side with straight legs, again a nice natural spine, belly pulled in, and just trying to feel a projection in the hip joint. Now try with bent legs, toes slightly out, but really try to project the hip. If you put your hand on the side, you can feel the bone project out. You're trying to move the bone in the socket. This is quite detailed work. It's all about the joints. To get the energy, you have to control the joints. There's a stretch in the joints. In Tai Chi, this is called opening the joints. Because when you open the joints, it stretches the blood vessels, it allows the blood to flow, and it also allows the energy, the chi, to flow. So we've got to create a lot of power in the hips. The power in the body comes from the hips, and you've got to feel that by stretching them, moving them, and mobilizing them. So now we try again, straight legs, but now try rotating, turning the hip. So bent knee slightly on the tip of the toes, turn the hip all the way in, rotate it in, and then turn the hip all the way out, rotate it out. So I call this Elvis knees. But you see, it's not so much about the movement, it's about controlling the joint. You've got to localize it, isolate the hip joint itself, try and rotate from the ligaments in the hip. You've got to feel the bone moving in the pelvis, in the socket. It's about moving the bones. Again, this is very deep. The energy runs deep, deep into the body. If we can access the bone structure, we will get more force. This is how you access the bone structure. You've got to access the ligaments. It's a secret to internal power in martial arts. The power will come from the hips. So now you see we've got a horse riding stance. Again, I've talked about that in the previous videos in the series, so check back the whole JEDI series. But now you can see a neutral spine, slight backwards arch. The hips are projecting backwards a little bit like you're sitting on a chair, but your knees are open in front, so you'll feel a stretch in the front of the hips as well. Once you've got that, keeping a vertical spine, just shift your weight side to side, stretching into the hip joint itself. Try and feel the stretch in one hip. As your weight goes into that hip, it's like you're trying to sit down on a chair at the side. There's a chair just behind you trying to sit down on it. Now, always in between, loosen up. Because again, you can get cramp. You're stretching the ligaments in a way you might not have done before. You're trying to access movement in the joint. So there's danger. You've got to do that carefully. Don't pull a muscle. Now, once more again, nice and straight. Pull in the belly, squeeze the glutes, drive the hips forwards, but pull the belly in. So you've got a dynamic tension here. The glutes are squeezing, pushing the hips forward, but the belly's pulled in. Now the rib cage is open, sternum tilting slightly up, and feel the stretch in the spine. Once you've got this is still a backwards arch, you lever forward at the hips. Legs are straight, spine is still neutral. Then again you stand up straight, push the hips forward. Project the hips backwards. You're trying to move the bone. The bone, the hip, the leg bone, the thigh bone moves in the pelvis. Feel a projection of the bones, but still a backwards arch. You're not moving the spine. You're creating a leverage only at the hip joint itself, and you have tension in the glutes. You're stretching the hips, stretching the glutes, but also tensing them. Now if you try with bent knees, lever forward, that allows you to lever a bit further, and hold the hands up behind the head, so you've still got a backwards arch. Your upper body, your spine is leaning backwards, but you lever forwards. And you counteract, you project your bottom backwards, because that moves your center of gravity backwards, allows you to lean forward easier. So again, now this is the secret of leaning forward. You've got to work in the day, do lots of stuff, lean forward. Usually you hunch forward and you hurt your back. If you can lean forward like this, you've still got a neutral spine. All the work in leaning forward goes to the glutes, the hip joint. You take the leverage from the hip joint, and you're practicing now going forward and back, squeezing the hips, squeezing the glutes to drive upwards, and then project the hips backwards to go forwards. Now let's try it again with straight legs. Straight legs, now this is like skiing. If you're a skier, you should understand this, and this is the secret to getting power in skiing. Same thing, you want the neutral spine, get the alignment, now lever forward. But because your knees go forward, you have to lever further forward. So you'll see, you have to lever forward with the knees. You lever forward further, project the hips back, the knees go in front, but the hips go behind. Keep the belly pulled in. And you're also pulling in with the hips. This is the psoas muscle. So this works between the psoas muscle and the hips, the glutes. See now, even though I'm levering forward, I'm still squeezing the glutes. The hips are projected back, but I hold tension. And if you can hold the tension in the glutes, the hips, you'll hold your spine up easily. It's not the lumbar spine, not the lower spine. Be very careful. No pain in the spine. It goes all the way down to the hips. Now to go up and down with a vertical spine, your hips go apart. See, in skiing, you've got to bend forward. Now, if you want to stay vertical, the more vertical you want to be, the further you have to open your hips in the front and you can stay vertical. So now you go up and down in this frog-legged horse riding stance. Again, this is a bit like ballet. But as you go down, you see the hips separate. I'm using my fists to show you the hip joint. You go down, the hips open. You come up, the hips close. You see, you're projecting the hips backwards like sitting on a chair, but you're opening the hips in the front also. There's a stretch in the hips. So effectively, your hips separate as you go down, and then you squeeze the glutes to rise up, and the hips close. So now try with the arms behind the head. So you're going up and down, but you're doing the movement from a stretch in the hip joint. It's very powerful. The ligaments in the hip joint are very, very strong. You're not compromising the spine, and you're creating force just by the ligaments, the tendons in the hips. Once you've got that, you can go side to side, again, feeling the separation of the hips. I'm holding my fists here to demonstrate the hip joint. So now you try twisting as well as shifting your weight. Now if you look at my fist, you see I'm rotating the hip joint. Hips separate. Then I twist. One hip twists in, the other hip twists out. I'm creating a dynamic tension in the ligaments of my hip joint. Again, activating the glutes. The glutes are activated, a slight backwards projection like you're sitting on a chair, but also they're open in the front. There's a stretch in the hips. Once you can feel this, you're moving that stretch from one hip to the other. You'll feel a bounce, an elasticity in your body. You're trying to activate the ligaments. These are very strong elastic power. So this is the secret to generating power in the legs for kicking and power in your stance. You can have very strong stance if you can activate the hips and move very powerfully. Now we just try lifting up the leg. So this is more relaxed, but it's the same business. To lift up the legs, you've got to project the hips backwards. I'm using the hip joint, the ligaments in my hips, to lift up the leg. It's not the front thigh muscle. I'm pulling the hip backwards to collapse the leg in, pulling the heel up towards the sit bone. You're trying to bring the heel upwards. So that's the secret. The hip joint controls the leg, but it's quite tricky to control the hips. Now we finish off with a nice deep breathing. So you inhale, hands go up above the head, exhale, hands go down in front. But now feel it from the hips. Squeeze the glutes to rise up, and then sink down, separate the hips, sit down into a stretch of the hips. You hold your body weight in the hip joint. It's not the thigh muscle. Quite tricky. You've got to work on this. Try and maintain a perfect alignment in the spine. Inhale, stretch up, expand the ribs at the back. Exhale, sink down, but keep a vertical spine. See, even though the hands go down, the shoulders, the rib cage, the neck is up and back. Think of this like doing ballet. You're doing qigong, you're doing tai chi, you're doing kung fu, but you're doing it like a dancer, a ballerina. That is not to look good, it is because you're looking for efficiency, perfect alignment of the bone structure, perfect control of the mobility of your joints. It's all about the ligaments, the tendons, moving the bones, separating the bones. I hope this made sense. You've got to play with it. It's tricky, but be careful. You can pull a muscle. You can stretch yourself. Be careful. Very slow, very careful. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in any of these other videos here.